discuss enlargement and Turkey-EU relations, so let's not lose much time. I'm Meltem Mütüler-Baç. Meltem Segers is over there. So you'll go first for half an hour, and then I'll go after half an hour. Next week we'll do the repetition of this, but this time the students can ask questions. Okay.
Yes, yeah, well, so, exactly.
Very good.
How I saw things. Okay, thank you very much. Let me please warmly welcome you too, Meltem, and our counterparts in Istanbul. Professor Müftülübaş is a prominent expert on EU-Turkish relations, and so. Okay. There is a problem.
We can hear you, we can see you. We don't have a problem.
Yeah, is it okay? Yeah. Yes, dear Meltem.
Yes, dear Matthias. We can hear you perfectly fine.
Technicians here.
Okay, we can hear you perfectly fine. Yeah, all is okay here.
But we can't hear Istanbul now. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, let's start. Dear Meltem, I'm very pleased that we managed to pull off this again with the support of the Turkey Institute here in The Hague. Lily is not here, unfortunately, but she will be on coming Wednesday, I think. It's an exciting experience in a turbulent time for Turkish-EU relations. Well, let's start my lecture, approximately 25 minutes. In my part of today's lecture, I will cover the broader theme of EU enlargement, and I will do this from a more general perspective. I will assess some key theoretical and historical issues with regard to the process of EU enlargement. Towards the end of the lecture, I will zoom in on some general aspects of the question of Turkish EU accession.
What we need to do is mute the microphone on the Turkish side.
Okay. Okay. Meltem, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Our technicians are asking to mute the mic in Istanbul. Is that possible?
Mikrofonu kapatacakmış burada. Yeah, we're doing that.
Konuşurken.
Evet,
okay.
Sonra açacağız. Okay. Mikrofonu kapatacağız.
Yeah, okay. Okay?
Fine.
Yeah, let's. Okay. I will continue now. Towards the end of the lecture, I will zoom in on some general aspects of the question of Turkish EU accession from a historical angle, so as to anticipate the lecture of Professor Müftülübaş, who will focus on recent developments and policy issues concerning the EU-Turkey relation of today. Let me start my lecture by shortly discussing the early stages of the process of European integration, the 1950s and 60s. As to these first years of the integration process, it is, I think, very important to underline that the process of European integration during the 1950s represented, and this may come as a surprise to you, a phenomenon against many odds. Until the end of 1958, when it became utterly clear that the EEC Treaty would come into effect and the Europe of the six would live indeed, many had believed that the whole undertaking of European integration sooner or later would end in failure, simply because the project was too ambitious or too idealistic or too continental or too French or too Franco-German or too Roman Catholic or too much a combination of some or all of these features. For many years, many believed, and quite rightfully so, among the six. The Europe of the Six definitely seemed there to stay from that moment on, coming into force of the Rome Treaties, 1958. The realists, who had expected something different, thus had to adapt to this new reality. The reality fresh chapter in the history of European integration, in which the integration process would be dominated by one overarching issue: enlargement. Outsiders, like the United Kingdom, Ireland, and the Scandinavian countries, came to the conclusion that they had no other choice than to seriously consider joining the project of which they had always suspected that it would fail. But their related and calculated enthusiasm aroused suspicion among the six, of course. Was the turnaround, especially the British turnaround, really sincere? And even more important, what would British accession mean for the future of the process of European integration? The more successful the integration process among the six became, the more the vested interests of the six founding states of European integration and the supranational European institutions grew in value. It was because of these vested interests that not only Gaullish France or Sarkozy France, but also most of the leading bureaucrats of the supranational institutions, like the first president of the European Commission, the German Walter Hallstein, were highly skeptical about enlarging the European communities. Those Europeans feared, and by the way they still fear, that widening would go at the expense of deepening of integration, and therefore at the expense of the growing power and influence of the supranational institutions they served and loved so much. Moreover, they feared that their dream, in which Europe not only represented a powerful economic bloc, but also a united political entity, acting as a unitary actor in world politics, that this vision, future vision, would turn into an illusion if skeptics of supranationalism and or powerful states, other states like the United Kingdom, would join the process. And this sentiment, this fear for enlargement from within the very core of the European integration process, still forms a strong undercurrent in EU's dealings with the question of enlargement today. Let me tell you a short anecdote to illustrate the seriousness of these fears and the aversion regarding enlargement within the European Union. While sailing the lakes and ditches of Friesland in the northern part of the Netherlands, together with some European friends in the early 1970s, Euro Commissioner Robert Marjolin watched the Dutch cows, typically black and white, grazing in the grassland along the ditches. The continuously changing palette, black and white, appeared to bring the Euro Commissioner in a higher state of consciousness. And Marjolin started philosophizing about the future of European integration. And at a certain moment he gave free rein to his thoughts about enlargement, entrusting his comrades that he would leave the European project immediately if the United Kingdom and its helping troops from Scandinavia and Ireland would join the European community. Enlarging European integration with these states would imply robbing his, Marjolin's Europe from its soul and from its ultimate goal of political unity. The others, the newcomers, would transform his beloved continental little Europe into something quite different, probably more Atlantic.
There you go.
And myself knew that he would not be able to cope with these changes. And indeed, after the accession of the United Kingdom, Ireland and Denmark in 1973, Marjolin quitted his job in Brussels immediately. This anecdote tells us something. First of all, it tells us how difficult it is for parties involved in the European integration process to share their vested interests and attain power positions with newcomers and be open to others who want to join the process. Especially if those others are big and autonomous states with a strong national identity. Of course, this all notwithstanding the fact that enlargement solemnly declared in every single European treaty. Secondly, the anecdote about Robert Marjolin underlines that decisions to enlarge or not to enlarge European integration ultimately are political decisions. In other words, those decisions in essence are neither based on objective facts, nor the result of an automatic process towards accession. On the contrary, they are dependent on highly fluid factors like, for instance, political basis in the member states and within the European institutions, political will, and the balance between certain grand designs regarding what Europe may or should become in the future. Of course, those clashes of grand designs about the future of European integration are more intense and provoke more tortuous negotiating in those cases in which the candidate member state is more powerful and has a stronger national identity, independently from it being part of Europe. The most telling examples of candidate members from this heavy A category are, of course, the former empires and strong partners, the United Kingdom and Turkey. Moreover, the final decisions to enlarge or not to enlarge the European integration process historically lay with the European Council. And this implies that the position of the accession states is considered to be of secondary importance. The question that can be raised now is how do we have to understand the European enlargement process? How can we make sense of Europe's decisions in favor of enlargement in certain periods and against enlargement in others? General accounts on European integration still largely follow the geopolitically or economically driven intergovernmental theories, as you all know. These theories consider European integration to be the reflection of two things: the national interests of the most powerful member states and their welfare state systems, it's the first thing, and secondly, the member states' corresponding rational policies focused on maximizing national security or maximizing national economic gains in terms of welfare state policies. In short, these theories, as you all probably know, built on the assumption of the rational actor and are construed within the state-centric paradigm. However, these still dominant theories are far from perfect explanations for European integration, let alone for the enlargement process. Stronger even, the shortcomings of these rationalist theories are demonstrated most tellingly in the recent case of EU's Eastern enlargement. Excuse me. The subsequent decisions of the European Council that led to the Big Bang enlargement of 2004 were part of a series of policy choices that are very difficult to explain just in terms of national interests of the most powerful member states of the EU. Stronger even, as recent research underscores, according to the rational determinants, association of the Central and Eastern European countries and not accession should have been the dominant EU policy towards the issue of Eastern enlargement. Moreover, leading rationalists didn't come up with a credible solution to this historical puzzle that confronted their theories. On the contrary, some leading rationalists have candidly admitted that their theory of national interests simply cannot explain EU's Eastern enlargement. Hence, to explain how it was possible that the rational outcome, association, as Jacques Delors, as from 1989, continually proposed, by the way, that this rational outcome, association, was transformed into a Big Bang enlargement in 2004, a far less rational option, is now generally labeled an insurmountable problem for rationalist theories. So what is going on then in the process of enlargement if it isn't rational decision-making? Not really surprising, perhaps, yet strikingly underrepresented in the existing literature, the reality of treaty negotiations, such as enlargement negotiations, normative ideas. In European studies, the case of EU's Eastern enlargement counts as the ultimate proof of the superiority of the so-called constructivist theorizer. You probably have read already a lot about it. Constructivist Frank Schimmelpfennig, for instance, pointed to the essentially normative phenomena of identity and corresponding rhetorical discourse as the main explanatory variables behind EU's Eastern enlargement. In short, Schimmelpfennig built his explanation on the self-reinforcing dynamic of rhetorical commitment to the Europe-wide resonance of EU identity, or what he called the community trap. For an in-depth explanation of this important phenomenon in European integration, I refer to the online literature I prescribed for this lecture. Schimmelpfennig's constructivist challenge dates already from 2001, and it suffers from a lack in follow-up both in terms of empiricism and Euro-focused conceptualization. But what can be concluded from Schimmelpfennig's limited research, though, when combined with an increasing number of in-depth historical studies into the first episodes of European integration, is that European integration by no means has been the result of a conscious plan. There never existed a blueprint based on a scrupulously balancing act between national interests, as often seemed to be supposed in the existing literature and media coverage of European integration. On the contrary, the integration process probably rather developed, and so did the enlargement process, rather developed by default instead of by planning. As more primary source research becomes available, the history of European integration preeminently emerges as a story of unintended consequences, and sometimes even total chaos. National governments, nation states, and statesmen alike not seldom felt completely lost in the uncontrollable and unforeseen courses of events. Most of the time, they were simply taken over by events beyond their control. Often, they had no idea what to do next, and in despair, sought certainty in a very general normative vision regarding the future of European integration. For instance, like Europe as a Christian or humanist undertaking, or Europe as a pro-Atlantic project, or Europe as the ultimate materialization of social market economy. This uncontrollability and lack of oversight with the decision makers, nevertheless, has mostly been neglected both in media coverage and in historiography. And this is probably precisely because it is so difficult to make sense of European integration on the basis of the stunningly normative and irrational considerations which often decided Europe's course. But there exists also a more historical reason for this neglect in the existing historiography and media coverage, this neglect of irrational factors. During the 1950s and 1960s, the governments of the six could credibly claim that they failure, this whole European integration undertaking. It is the irony of history that the six only then, in 1958, with the single most important treaty of European integration finally in place, started a feverish search for the core of the unprecedented and unforeseen process that kept them spellbound already since May 1950, the date of the declaration of the Schuman Plan. One of the repercussions of this belated quest to discover Europe's integration score was that Western Europe got entangled in a fierce fight over the property rights of this highly successful integration process. A fight that lasts till today, and which in essence is a rhetorical fight, or if you like, a war of religions of the future of the integration process. A zero-sum fight between antithetical visions of federalists, of confederalists of many types and sorts, of patriotic Eurosceptics, and in which a fight in which compromise was and is often utterly impossible. This all has strikingly, and I underline strikingly, little to do with rational calculation on the basis of national interests. It's far more close to a culturally loaded showdown between clashing visions with regard to Europe's future, both in institutional and in geographical terms. In fact, most of the governments, split as they were and are between different European visions, cannot even decide what the national interest in European integration is, let alone that they can calculate different European scenarios from the perspective of the national interest. Nevertheless, and paradoxically enough, national ex post facto rationalism has remained the most popular game in the realm of rhetoric, and not in the least in the matter of EU enlargement and Turkish accession, as you all know. It is precisely this paradoxical divergence between ex post facto rationalized public rhetoric on the one hand and literal chaotic decision-making on the other that makes European integration and the process of EU enlargement so difficult to tackle. Governments continuously claim that rational decisions in the national interest are the main driver of the process. And indeed, at first, and sometimes even at second glance, the actual material facts of European integration often seem to prove them right to do so. Yet, this very compelling claim that it's all about national interest did and does not reflect the real course of events. Stronger even, it blinds out the fact that the real core of the integration process is far from the portrayed harmony based on the convergence of national interests. Instead, this core rather seems a strongly culturally influenced clash of largely irreconcilable normative ideas about the future of European integration, as I stated before. Let me list but three of some of the most obvious of these clashing future visions. First vision: Europe as an open, broad, transatlantic free trade area, including all European NATO members. This vision includes Turkey as a member of the EU. Second vision: Europe as a more protectionist, continental, francophone, if you like, or African bloc. This vision excludes Turkey because it's Eurasian. Turkey should be considered Eurasian, according to many French at least. And the third vision: Europe as a future United States of Europe, based on deep supranational integration of social markets and societies. And in this vision, Turkey is in or excluded depending on the fear for enlargement to go at the expense of deepening, as I discussed in the first part of this lecture. Now, to end, what does this all mean in relation to the question of Turkey's future accession to the European Union? First and foremost, the course of the enlargement process is highly unpredictable, and moreover, the question of a possible full EU membership of Turkey stares economically and military powerful regional hegemon in this area of the world. It would be interesting to hear Professor Müftülübak's vision on this matter. All the more so since one of EU's leading Turkey bashers, former Dutch Euro Commissioner Frits Bolkestein, chose last Monday, the date of Europe, to make a public plea for Turkey's accession to the EU in the light of the recent developments in Northern Africa and the Arab world. Furthermore, much will depend on how future EU membership will be framed in Turkey itself. Will it be rationalized as something worth to strive for, as it was done before, or will this change? And last, but far from least, does Turkey have credible alternatives to EU accession? Or is it striving for full EU membership, the inevitable reality to which Turkey has to adapt? Painful, but inevitable. Just like the UK had to do a couple of decades ago. If the latter is the case, and I would like to discuss this maybe further next week, if the latter is the case, if it's inevitable, if it will be the inevitable goal of Turkish European policy to join the EU as a full member, this probably implies waiting longer and bending still more towards EU's expanding wishes, as the United Kingdom had to do in the 1960s and 70s. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Mete. Now you can hear me? You can hear me now, right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, well, thanks a lot for your introduction. What I'll do is I'll try to give a brief background with respect to Turkey's EU relations, but there are a few points that I'd like to touch upon in your introduction. Now, Frits Bolkestein, interestingly, some years ago, in 2004, made a speech right when the Commission made a declaration that Turkey fulfills the political aspects of the Copenhagen criteria, and therefore accession negotiations could begin. Bolkestein, who was then the European Commissioner responsible for internal markets, said, well, if Turkey ever becomes a member of the European Union, then the efforts of the Austrian, Polish, Czech soldiers in 1683 in defending Vienna would be in vain. So he has, more or less come a long way in 7 years. Let me start with a few figures. Now, there is a significant change there in him. Now, Turkey currently is now something like the 15th largest economy in the world. It has grown economically tremendously in the past, well, probably 5 and 6 years, much more, but before that. It has the highest economic growth rate in all the OECD countries, which most of the European Union members look at with significant envy. It has now the 5th largest army in the world, the 2nd largest after United States in NATO. In terms of its connections with the Arab countries and European countries, it has unparalleled rapporteur. So when you look at it today, in 2011, 6 years after the negotiations have begun, European Union have changed dramatically, and Turkey has changed dramatically. And the Turkish public support to Turkey's EU membership was something like 73-75% in 2005 when the negotiations began. Now it's less than 30%. It's declining very rapidly. And part of this decline, both with respect to the public support to the EU and the Turkish desire to become a member of the EU, is related to what is actually happening to the EU. In terms of, for example, to give more figures, the Turkish banking sector is very solid, and compared to what has been happening in the European Union since 2008, a lot of people in Turkey are now very happy that we didn't actually become a member of the EU. Turkey could today meet all the Maastricht convergence criteria, and in 2007, the chapter for economic and financial matters was ready to be opened, and it was in 2007 then, 4 years ago, that Turkey could meet the Euro criteria, and President Sarkozy have vetoed opening the chapter, precisely because based on the argument that President Sarkozy said, if this chapter is open, then that would mean Turkey would be able to adopt the euro prior to membership. Now, we now know that there are a number of countries in the eurozone that never actually met the euro criteria, but they still became eurozone members. So looking at it from this perspective, from this corner of the world, the EU has lost a lot of its attractiveness. Now, there are still certain things in the EU that we would like to acquire, more specifically the democratic values and norms and the political system. Right? My students would back me up there, right? Yeah. But in terms of other things, things have changed. So this actually also reminds me back the 50s. Now, when the Rome Treaty was signed in 1957, setting the European Economic Community and Eurozone, we actually heard what was happening, well, the Turkish Foreign Ministry, of course, heard what was happening in the European continent through the Greek application. Now, in the post-World War II period, Turkey had become a member of all the European institutions, NATO, OECD. It was a founding member of Council of Europe prior to even Spain and Portugal could pass in front of its door. So it was one of the founding members of Council of Europe. So when we heard that there is a new European institution to which the Greeks have applied, Turkey also signed its application. But prior to the proposition or preparing of the application, the foreign ministry officials went to the Turkish government leaders, the prime minister, and said, well, there is this new design for some form of economic integration in Europe, and we think Turkey should also apply. And the prime minister thought a little, and he said, well, are we sure that if we apply to this institution, and if we become a member, all the jobless Italians would come to Turkey looking for jobs? And this is 1959. Now, Turkey, of course, applied, and the European Commission at the time, Walter Holstein, which you also mentioned, was very happy about the Greek and the Turkish applications, because these two applications have actually provided the original six with confirmation that the institution that they're creating is something valid in the international arena, which, for example, the UK was refraining from doing so. Now, the minute the applications arrived, the European Commission actually designed a formula, again, something that you and I have talked about before, which is to prepare these two countries, Greece and Turkey, for their eventual accession, because they were not yet ready. But nothing in 1960, when the European Commission made that decision, was basically referring to the fact that Turkey is not part of Europe. So Turkey signed its association agreement in 1963, the Ankara Treaty, which is very, very basic and very important for whatever we are discussing today. The Ankara Treaty stated that Turkey is eligible to become a member of the European Community. So in terms of Turkish legal eligibility, as long as we have the Ankara Treaty, it's not possible for the European Commission or the European Council to turn to Turkey and say, you cannot be a member. The only thing that would be possible is you don't fulfill the membership criteria. But in terms of legal basis of eligibility, that's a vote that has sailed in 1963. Now, this is also part of the problem that Sarkozy and Merkel are confronting. So when they say, for example, that we have these treaties that we have to serve, pacta sunt servanda, they are referring to the Ankara Treaty. So what the Ankara Treaty does is very simple for us. It sets the legal basis of Turkey's eligibility, and it also states very firmly that when Turkey is ready, well, both when Turkey and the European Community is ready to fulfill the obligations arising from Turkish membership, Turkey would become a member. Now, after the Ankara Treaty, things have been very rocky with respect to Turkey-EU relations. 1960s, 70s, and 80s, in terms of the different directions that Turkey and the European Community / the EU went, we have seen very important changes. At the end of the Cold War, in 1989, I think it's very crucial for us, the developments then, is very crucial for us to understand what is happening today. It's in 1989 that the future of Europe has also changed. So the deepening of the European Union, the move towards political union, the reintegration of Central Eastern Europe have all been formulated with the systemic changes that we see after the end of the Cold War. Turkey's membership is directly affected from these systemic changes. The Turkish position in Europe began to be questioned seriously at the end of the Cold War. So questions like, is Turkey really part of Europe? If Turkey becomes a member of the European Union, would that be the end of the Union? And this is actually an opinion raised by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing during the constitutional treaty negotiations. This is also raised by Christian Democratic Party in Germany in a very open manner. So does certain Belgian politicians also voice that position. So the argument that we have is tied directly to the institutional changes in the European Union. That is, Turkish accession is something that directly is shaping, or it would shape, what kind of a European Union we would actually see. Now, this is not the impact that you actually saw with the Central Eastern European countries. With or without, let's say, Slovakia, with no offense to the Slovakians, the pattern of European integration would not drastically change. It's a relatively small country, not with a very significant political and geographical power, whereas Turkey has, and it always had that, it has a very important geostrategic position, it has significant political power, and now, for the past 5 years or so, it has become a global economic player, not a regional economic player. It has become a global economic player. So the minute Turkey becomes a member of the European Union, the internal balances in the EU will change. Now, what kind of changes is possible? In addition to what you have said, I would also bring the balances between the, well, of course, the supranationalists and the intergovernmentalists, that is the capacity of the EU to become a federal union or not, would be affected by Turkish integration. Big and small states, that would definitely drastically change. And poor and rich states, so in terms of net contributors, net recipients from the budget in terms of size, and in terms of the vision of the European Union, Turkey would have a significant impact on the internal balances in the EU, something that none of the Central Eastern European countries could actually have, with possibly the exception of Poland. So, in the enlargement process that was launched in the late 1990s, I think the European Union was facing a very important dilemma. On the one hand, they had the legal basis, they had the Ankara Treaty, which said that Turkey is eligible. So responding to Turkey, who applied for membership in 1987, was something very hard. The European Commission and the Council and the EU leaders could not say, you cannot be a member of the Union as long as you have the path-dependent process and as long as you have the treaties. So the only way out for the European Union leaders was to say that Turkey does not meet the qualifications for membership, which it didn't in mid-1990s, but I would still argue that, and some of the papers that I assigned for this course, if the students have read it, they could read it there. If Turkey didn't meet the qualifications, neither did Romania, nor did Bulgaria, nor did Latvia, nor did Lithuania. Now, so in terms of the criteria of EU membership, Turkey had problems, of course, in late 1990s, all throughout 80s. But the way that the European Union could actually phrase this was they couldn't say no to Turkey's membership on a legal basis, so they could only argue that as long as Turkey doesn't meet the criteria, it would never be a member, which is perfectly fine. Okay? But the Union still was faced with this major dilemma without saying no, how to say no. So we actually saw this in 1997 in the Luxembourg summit. We saw this in the European Commission's Agenda 2000 package. And then, at the end of the 1990s, we actually see a shift with the decision in Helsinki in 1999 to make Turkey a candidate country. So if you think of the Ankara Treaty as, let's say, one corner of this legal basis, Helsinki is another, because in the Helsinki summit, the European Council openly said Turkey is destined to join the EU under the same objective criteria from this perspective. If all of these internal divisions that we're discussing today existed then, which they did, then what prompted the European Union constantly to underline this message that Turkey is going to become a member of the European Union for the past 12, 13 years? And then once negotiations were opened in 2005 and things began to roll down, we suddenly see leaders such as the French president or the German chancellor saying, well, we actually didn't mean it then. We have to say it, and we wrote it on the presidency conclusions, which is now part of the EU community, but things have changed. So in terms of signals coming from the European Union to Turkey, there has been, for the past 10 years, constant mixed signals. Now, this is of course not something peculiar and specific to Turkey. This happened with Poland. This is not happening with Croatia. But in the Turkish case, the confusion is much larger on the EU component. Turkish confusion was not there. Turkey was dedicated to the goal of EU accession, and it made all these rounds of series of political and economic reforms starting in 2001. So it changed its economic system in order to meet the, well, it had other economic problems, but also in order to meet the economic aspects of the Copenhagen criteria. So that by the time you come to 2006, the European Commission's progress report said that Turkey is a fully functioning market economy, which it did not say for the countries that became members, and who are members today. So the Commission never said Romania or Bulgaria are fully functioning market economies, because they're not. But they are EU members. So in terms of the Copenhagen criteria, okay, what we're saying from this part of the world, let's say, or Europe, that Turkey meets the Copenhagen criteria, and the European Commission, which is the evaluator of this, says, hey, yes, you're meeting the Copenhagen criteria. And then with respect to the significant chapters like the financial and economic matters, Turkey meets the criteria there. And then the European Commission and the European Council says, well, yes, you are meeting the criteria, but you see there are other problems that we haven't encountered or we didn't expect. So the decline in the Turkish public support is also directly connected to the decline in the EU's credibility. So in the past 6 years of the accession negotiations, increasingly, the Turkish public nor the Turkish government sees the EU as a credible actor anymore. And this is a significant problem for the EU. This is not something, that is for Turkey-EU relations. This is something specific for the EU. Now, things add on top of that. For example, again, we sit here and we're watching the news, and we find out that the Greek government have actually given statistics that were completely manufactured in 2001 to the European Commission to qualify for the euro. Right, and you guys paid for it in Netherlands, exactly. So now we're saying, okay, we thought of the European Union working in a more or less desirable manner, where there is low corruption, where we would like to see the political norms assimilated in Turkey as well, and suddenly we see things that are happening in the EU that we didn't expect them to happen. So in terms of, on the one hand, you have the mixed signals, or things that are being said by the heads of state that completely reverse what is written in Helsinki, or what has been written in the negotiation framework of 2005. On the other hand, you actually see what is happening in the EU with respect to significant problems. And here, things are going pretty smoothly. So it's, both the Turkish government and the public start questioning, why do we want the EU to start with? Now, this is something very interesting for me, because this was not the case before. Now, at the end of the 90s and early 2000s, we actually worked for the EU. We wanted the EU membership. And wanting the EU membership was something desirable for material benefits. So there is a very important rational component of that. That is, higher economic growth, better political system, democratic stability, better protection of human rights, what have you, all that political package that comes with the EU norms, and that still is there. We still want that. Plus, the second component of the material benefits was, better integration to the economic markets. Now, over time, these material benefits have, to a large extent, on top of that, Turkey is also seeing that its negotiation process is not going the way that other countries' negotiation processes have went. Now, 2005, October 3, accession negotiations began. Accession negotiations began meant that automatically the screening process for all these 35 chapters also began. Now, in the screening process, the European Commission and Turkey, for all of these 35 chapters, identified certain problem areas in the Turkish legislation, of course. But they also identified areas where Turkey does not have any problems in conforming to the EU legislation. Now, once the screening process is completed and you have the reports more or less ready by the Commission and the Turkish government, these screening reports are then voted upon in the European Council for them to become common draft positions by the Commission. Now, we have first seen that in certain areas where Turkey does not have a problem with legislation, some member states veto the screening report that is prepared by the Commission and Turkey, where Turkey meets the criteria. Now, even in these chapters where the screening reports are approved unanimously in the Council, prior to the opening of the chapters, as I have given the example with Sarkozy's veto in financial economic matters, we also see in the Council opening of chapters veto, specifically by individual member states who argued that, yes, technically Turkey is ready, but we don't want Turkey in, so no. Now, this in return decreases this thing, that is, the Turkish adaptation to the EU legislation. So far it didn't happen. Turkey actually is continuing with the technical adaptation to the legislation process, but we have, out of 35 chapters, 5 chapters vetoed by France. So they cannot be opened as long as, you know, Sarkozy wakes up one morning and says, okay, I was wrong, I'm lifting my veto. We have 6 chapters vetoed specifically by Cyprus. And among these, you know, things like judicial rights, energy, because Cyprus sees the energy chapter critical for the routes of transport to pass through Cyprus. So Cyprus says no, even though energy is something, or energy security is something that is critical for EU's stability. So a chapter that is very important for the remaining, let's say, 26 member states cannot be opened, even though there are no, technical problems with the Turkish adaptation, because Cyprus wants some of the energy routes to pass through its own territory, so it vetoes the chapter. So currently, we have those 11 chapters, 5 by France, 6 by Cyprus, vetoed. We also have, as some of you are familiar with, the European Commission recommendation, which became a Council decision in December 2006, which suspended the opening of negotiations with 8 chapters that are directly related to Turkish opening of its ports and harbors to Cyprus. So you're looking at 11 plus 8, 19 frozen chapters, 11 vetoed, 8 already suspended. We have 13 chapters currently open. So we are now at a stage in the negotiations, which began in October 2005. In a matter of 6 years, okay, in a matter of 6 years, we have 13 chapters open, 19 frozen. Did I say 19? 19 frozen. Only 3 more that could be open. So we are now at this stage where we are actually seeing the end of the negotiation process. That is, unless the vetoes are not lifted, everything that we discuss with you right now, they're all very important, yes, but the technical aspects of the negotiations are coming to an end. There is only 3 more chapters, the procurement chapter, competition and social policy. That could be opened from today, and normally if you open 1 chapter every 6 months, we are looking at, more or less the process coming to its natural end in June 2012, at most December 2012. So the fact that the negotiations are going at a very, very slow pace, in a very rocky format, and the EU itself is changing for the worse, is, more or less creating a situation where, even though, the EU is still a very important partner for Turkey, both politically, economically, the EU membership goal is becoming less and less credible as a target goal. Now, bring on top of that the impact of the institutions. Turkey currently has something like 74 million people. It has, it would become, if it becomes a member today, the second largest member after Germany. Plus, in Turkey, there is still, more or less a respectable, stable birth rate, whereas in a number of European countries, that's declined very rapidly. So by the time you come to 2030, the European Union might see a very large, populous Turkey, which has become one of the largest economies in Europe, because today Turkey is number 5 in terms of European economies. UK, France, Germany, Italy is there, Turkey comes after, and Italy is about to lose to Turkey because of its very large debt. So in 2030, you're looking at a very powerful, populous, economically well-off Turkey, which doesn't need the EU at all. So in terms of the enlargement negotiations, I think we actually missed a very critical point. If Turkish negotiations begin exactly at the same time with the Central Eastern European countries, let's say with the remaining batch, the Helsinki 5 in 2000, and if Turkey became a member, let's say, at the same time as Bulgaria and Romania, this actually would have been better for the EU because Turkey would be in. And all of the material benefits that Turkish membership would bring would be for the European Union. Now, once that vote is gone, the Turkish desire to be in the EU is declining, and the European public doesn't want Turkey in anyway, and the European public is very angry at the European Union itself. So the transformation in the European Union is taking Turkey further away from Europe. Turkey is already moving away from Europe, and we're looking at probably the emergence of another type of a partnership. You could think of this as something like the EU has with Norway, but another type of a partnership which probably will fall short of membership. So I'll probably stop there. And all of these things, actually, we can discuss them next week, because I would like my students to participate. I know they all have some, and they are the next generation here. I'm not the next generation. I've been working on Turkey since 1989, and more or less things have changed tremendously here. And same thing, I would like your students to also participate, so we can actually think of the lecture next week in terms of, I can say a few introductory remarks, maybe you can say a few introductory remarks, Just will say a few introductory remarks, and then we'll leave the floor open to them. Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. I can't hear you.
Thank you very much, of course.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I fully agree with the schedule for next week.
Very good.
It's a
Very
good
good.
idea.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
See you
Bye-bye.
next week then.
Bye, guys. Commission recommended, yeah? The commission recommends and the council adopts. Bye, Matthew.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Niye uğraşıyordun? Sen kapat. Hayır sen
Bu arada
kapat.
15 oldu mu?